Hi, I'm Elizabeth Brown of the Phonics page. My years as a literacy tutor have given me a lot of insight into sight words. I hope that what I've learned about them will help you make a better informed decision about sight words and increase your understanding about them and their history. If you Google sight words, you get a bunch of pages teaching the Dolch sight words. One website in the top 10 states, "Many of these words cannot be sounded out because they do not follow decoding rules." Another, "I wish that I could offer you some quick and clever tricks for the teaching of sight words, but sight words, almost by definition, rarely follow any rules." So, what are the facts? What percentage do you think are actually irregular? 80%? 90%? Actually, only 33%, just a third of the Dolch sight words are irregular, and many of those irregularities are accounted for by a simple change. For example, S with a Z sound. Only 5 of these 220 Dolch sight words, just 2%, are so irregular they cannot be taught phonetically. This 220 word list was compiled by Edward Dolch, published in his 1948 book, Problems in Reading. To make his list, Dolch used 3 lists of the most frequently used words and took words that were common to all 3 lists, then added a few more words he deemed important but were only on 1 or 2 of the lists. The lists he used are shown in the bullets. He made his list because he found that many students taught with the Dick and Jane type whole word methods were having trouble memorizing more than a few hundred sight words, and he wanted to find the most important words for students to memorize first. So, the sight words are actually not words that are irregular, but instead are frequently used words. While a few websites acknowledge this history of the Dolch sight words, it is a common misconception that most of these sight words are irregular. I first started tutoring in 1994 with a literacy organization that used whole word methods. They made it sound natural and exciting, and I was looking forward to making a difference in my students' lives. After a month of lessons twice a week, my first student had learned only 3 new words. I switched to phonics and soon saw rapid progress. At first, I did not think that sight word lists in a phonics program were harmful. Then, I began to give reading grade level tests to every parent I met. We're a military family that has lived in several different states, and the hundreds of children I've tested have lived in countless more, so I have tested children from many different schools and school districts. I found that schools that taught more sight words had higher percentages of students with reading problems, and when schools taught the same number of sight words, the more the school emphasized the sight words, the more reading problems I found. The only schools where I didn't find any reading problems were 3 schools that used good phonics programs with very little emphasis on sight words. I thought that I had found a problem with a girl from one of these schools, but later, when I started tutoring her, found that she had transferred in from a school in another state that taught with a lot of sight words. All of my students had developed guessing habits to some degree from learning their sight words. It took a while to unlearn these habits and form new habits. To use a sports analogy, sight words are teaching students to throw like a girl. My husband taught me to throw a football and a softball. I had no football experience at all and quickly learned how to throw a nice spiral, albeit only 20 or 30 yards. Softball was another matter. I had played a little softball and had your basic shot put technique. It was much harder to learn to throw a softball correctly, as I had to unlearn my old shot put habits and develop new habits. I had to concentrate hard to not use the old techniques. The same applies to my remedial reading students. Some tricks, like using nonsense words, help, but it takes time and concentration for them to break their guessing habits. And the more sight words they have been taught and the longer they have been reading, seeing these same Dolch words over and over again in their books, the harder it is to break these guessing habits. To read the whole quote, pause the movie or go to my sight word page. Ari talks about how it's difficult to change a student's habits and suppress their habit of guessing words based on context and letter cues. She also states that findings suggest that it's easier to teach phonics first than to later remediate students with phonics. The left side of the brain normally processes language, sounds, and sequences, while the right side normally processes pictures and wholes. Recent brain studies have shown that good readers have more activity on the left side of the brain while they're reading, and poor readers have more activity on the right side. Phonics remediation of poor readers showed an increase in activity on the left side and a decrease in activity on the right side. With my students, I have found that sight words seem to cause my students more problems with guessing, and they have a harder time sounding out words than people taught with good phonics programs that teach few sight words. I believe these guessing problems may be caused by something I call sight word overshadowing. This is a theory I developed after reading about verbal overshadowing. Verbal overshadowing is an effect where the verbal side of your brain is being a detriment to the visual side of your brain. When people were asked to verbally describe a face, that impaired their ability to recall the image of that face. With sight word overshadowing, learning words as whole pictures may be impairing the ability to learn words by sound. In this case, the visual is overshadowing the verbal. This shows another problem with sight words. If you are learning them by sight, many of them look similar. Most of my students have trouble with many of them, especially when they get tired. There are even more Dolch words with this problem. You can see a table with more Dolch sight words that have configurational similarity, as the author of the table, Dr. Raymond Larita, describes them. If you have a child in school bringing home a sight word list, it is not obvious from the list how phonetically regular the words are. The regularity is hidden because the Dolch sight words are commonly listed alphabetically and also divided across grade levels. As an example, buy and fly are taught in first grade, why taught in second, and try not taught till third. Here is a much easier way to teach them. Simply teach them phonetically. You should not actually teach sight words in isolation, but along with other words that follow their patterns. Hi and pie are not sight words, but are added to show the phonetic pattern. The tougher words when and then are taught in first grade, but the simple phonetic word 10 is not taught until third grade. Here are some examples of Dolch sight words that are completely phonetic. The markings on top are UPP, a marking I developed to help remedial students. I show you how to sound out all 220 of these Dolch sight words on my website. Click on Reading, and then click on Sight Words, and then you'll get the sight word page. The explanations are there and also links to files with all the words. Here are some examples of some exceptions. Words in English will not end in V, so words that end in V may either be long or short. Also, S as Z or F as V. Finally, here are the 5 sight words that can actually be taught as true sight words. The first 3 can be taught phonetically with some work, but the last 2 are pretty crazy. It's best to teach your child phonics at home first if your school teaches using sight words. Make sure you have taught all the sight words phonetically, but add in additional words. You should not teach the sight words in isolation. You do not need to teach more than 5 words as wholes by sight. I highly recommend using Webster's Blueback Speller. It's free, and students who learn phonics and spelling with it were able to immediately read out of the King James Version of the Bible after completing it. There are instructions on how to use the speller on my website. If your student has developed a guessing habit from reading sight words, it is important to remove them from their guessing environment by not allowing them to do any reading until they complete a phonics program. You can move through a program quickly. I found with my students that they do better when they focus on learning words and sounds in isolation without the use of sentences or stories. When they finish the complete program, they'll be able to read any story they want. I have also found nonsense words and the use of syllables and spelling to be helpful. There are free remedial reading lessons available at my website that uses nonsense words, syllables, and spelling. Webster's Speller is also a good resource for remedial students. You can use the MWIA to figure out if your student has been taught too many sight words and could improve their reading abilities with phonics. The MWIA compares the speed at which a student reads a list of sight words compared to a list of simpler phonetic words. If your student is reading the MWIA phonetic list more than 10% slower than the holistic list or makes more errors on the phonetic list, they could benefit from phonics instruction. To learn more, just go to the website, thephonics.page.org. You can get to the sight word page directly by Googling sight words by sound. Good luck!